background or staying in the middle of a...
Well, it'll be exciting at Ellerslie tomorrow for the running of the Auckland Cup.
Imagine waking up to that one a bit late.
We're about to talk to weather forecaster Philip Duncan, and our glaciers may be looking a bit sad and bedraggled after this roasting summer, but the big heat seems to have gone out of the evenings. Are you feeling the weather change?
Yes, it's starting to cool in the mornings and evenings.
And I love it.
Oh, so you're not
Makes
sad?
me so happy.
No, I'm a bit of both. I'm a bit happy and a bit sad.
All right, that's...
Is that okay?
That's okay.
That's all right.
That's human life.
Yeah.
David Taylor is an Aussie weather forecaster, often quoted in media, and he owns Brisbane and East Coast weather over there. And he is saying they can expect 6 more scorching weeks of summer, followed by a short autumn and a viciously cold winter. And he is relying on sunspot activity, but he also uses the European Centre for Medium Range. I mean, he uses the orthodox forecasting places as well. And we thought this was a bit interesting. And does it have a local equivalent? New Zealand forecaster Philip Duncan joining us from Weather Watch. Good afternoon, Philip.
G'day, Jim. How are you?
Very well. Thanks for coming on. What are you thinking we're in for? Could we get an extra long summer as well? What do you think?
I think so, but it depends on where you are. So certainly the upper half of the North Island, I could see summer-like conditions going right through until April and through part of April as well. But I think if you're in the lower half of the South Island, you are already in autumn, and we're seeing next week 2 days with highs of just 13 degrees. So they're definitely out of that heat wave that they were in a few weeks ago. Things are definitely changing. So the northern part of the country still seems to be very much affected by these subtropical airflows, and that's keeping the temperatures up.
Is it possible, that's interesting, Philip, and is it possible to anticipate a bad winter like they're experiencing in the UK and like this guy says Australia's in for?
I don't tend to, because I don't see, certainly in the northern hemisphere, our weather is separated by the equator. It all moves to the poles. So whatever's going on in England heads off to the Arctic Circle. Whatever happens in New Zealand heads off towards Antarctica. So our weather isn't directly related to them, other than entire climate change, where the whole globe is warming up. That is what is helping to create more of these dramatic downpours, these heat waves, and even big snowstorms. We're seeing lots of extremes. But as far as this winter's concerned, I think New Zealand's going to be in a very neutral zone. La Nina should be fading away, and that encourages a chaotic weather pattern, which is what we had last year, where you get all sorts of stuff thrown at us. We can have a tropical northerly one day and an Antarctic southerly the next. Then a big high rolls in and we're into dry weather. It's all 4 seasons basically as we go through winter.
All right, and thanks for that too. Can you give us, before you go, your educated opinion about what Cyclone Ola is going to do to us, please?
It's proving to be a very interesting cyclone. The latest from America, we trust the Americans. They got the last 2 cyclones bang on for us. They are now picking this storm coming into more of the Tasman Sea and crossing over out near Napier. So that's a bit of a game changer, but the storm could weaken a lot once it makes landfall, just like Gita did. So there's still a lot of moving parts that we've got to work out just yet, but it's looking serious.
All right, thank you, Philip. Philip Duncan from Weather Watch. That is almost us on the panel. The Warriors are about to kick off. I read today there are no expectations of a top 8 performance. So with no expectations of a top 8 performance, we may well see a top 8 performance.
We may see one.
Which in turn brings an expectation of a top 8 performance. And it just goes on and on.
But we cannot. We've got to go. Andrew Clay, thanks to you for your company today.
Our pleasure, Jim, as always.
And Alan Reid, you too.
Thank you.
I hope you both have a lovely weekend.
You too.
And the same goes to everybody. Thanks for joining us, and we're back next week. Checkpoint with John Campbell coming right up.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight on Checkpoint, Kim Jong-un invites Donald Trump to North Korea. No one is saying where, but the leaders will meet by May. They are both now saying. Donald Trump announces steep new tariffs on steel imports. A revamped version of the Trans-Pacific Partnership is signed. Outrage from locals after Air New Zealand cans its service from Kapiti, the Kapiti coast, to Auckland. Fletcher Construction finally responds to claims it could be liable for costs associated with any substandard repair work after the earthquakes. An amount-aspiring tramper with a badly injured leg has a stranger to thank after her emergency locator beacon led to him being rescued. All of that and much more coming up after the news.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat and aho. The Department of Corrections is putting extra security around several sex offenders living near schools in South Auckland. The department has apologised to 2 schools which were not told about the offenders living less than a kilometre away from them for at least 2 years. It says it will try to rehouse 3, but 8 sex offenders will remain at the 2 boarding houses. The Northern Regional Commissioner, Jeanette Burns, says they can walk around the neighbourhood, but they're monitored.
They're on GPS and there are exclusion zones, which we are notified immediately through the GPS monitoring if they go anywhere into those exclusion zones which are like the schools and parks. And then we notify police immediately, who follow up very, very swiftly.
Jeanette Burns says finding accommodation for the offenders in the tight housing market is corrections' most difficult job. South Korean officials say the US President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will meet by May. However, the White House says the timing is yet to be decided. The ABC's chief correspondent Philip Williams reports from Washington.
The offer to meet came from South Korean officials following a summit between North and South Korea earlier this week. President Trump was briefed at the White House today by the South Korean officials, who say the president accepted the offer. North Korea will halt its nuclear weapons program while negotiations between the 2 countries are underway.
Kim pledged that North Korea will refrain from any further nuclear or missile tests.
North and South Korea will hold a leadership summit next month.
Philip Williams reporting. The Kapiti Coast Mayor says residents feel abandoned by the state-owned airline which has axed its service linking the beachside community with Auckland. Kay Goodanathan says he's disgusted he was only told of the suspension last night.
Air New Zealand is a national flag carrier. The branding of Air New Zealand is the branding of New Zealand. I can't see how they could treat a local community in this appalling manner. A private corporation would treat its stakeholders much better than this.
Kay Goodanathan says Air New Zealand attended an open day at Kapiti Airport last week and there was no mention of any threat to the service. The business community is backing the newly signed Trans-Pacific Partnership. New Zealand and 10 other Pacific Rim nations confirmed the agreement in Chile this morning, with trade ministers calling it a powerful signal against protectionism and trade wars. The pact is estimated to add $1.2 to $4 billion to the economy, mainly through lower tariffs and other barriers. The chief executive of the Wine Growers Association, Philip Gregan, says there's a sense of relief a deal has been done.
There's some very big trade issues being discussed and speculated on at the moment, and to see something concrete being done in a positive way for trade and the New Zealand economy in a wider sense is, I think, very positive.
Philip Gregan. But TPP opponents argue the revised TPP is effectively the old deal and it remains bad for workers, consumers and the environment. And New Zealand failed to completely stop foreign corporations from being able to sue the government through the new Trans-Pacific Partnership. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says the government wanted to stop the investor-state dispute settlement provisions from applying to New Zealand altogether, but only partly achieved that goal.
We managed in the general negotiations to make a huge change there to investor screening. We then set out to undertake side letters, so with individual countries we also suspended the provisions entirely. I'm pleased with the progress we made there, but we didn't get as far as we would have liked.
The government has signed side agreements excluding the controversial dispute process with 5 of the other countries. 100 tourists who were trapped by slips overnight at the Blue Duck station near Taumaranui have been evacuated by helicopter. Ruapehu Emergency Management Officer Nick Watson says 5 commercial helicopters were used this afternoon to deliver supplies to the station staff and residents and flew the others out.
The younger ones were fine and they've already got on their buses and they've left to go to Wellington. They were really excited about the trip and all the excitement they've had. We've now got the older generation who've gone in there as bikers or canoeists. They're very much shell-shocked about it all, and we're just looking after their welfare needs now. There's about 12 to 13 of them that we'll look after.
Nick Watson says an aerial survey of the road is being done to assess the extent of the damage. It's 5:04. Sport, and the Black Caps will see how batsman Ross Taylor is feeling in the morning before making a decision on whether he plays in the series decider against England in Christchurch tomorrow. Taylor's 181 not out in Dunedin on Wednesday kept the series alive for New Zealand as they won by 5 wickets to level the 5-match series at 2-all. However, the victory came at a cost, with Taylor aggravating a thigh injury. Teammate Tom Latham says Taylor hasn't given any indication as to what his chances of playing might be.
He'll obviously be assessed over today, and hopefully he wakes up good tomorrow. But yeah, I guess it's hard to say in terms of whether he'll play or not. But you know, he's, I'm sure, getting all the medical treatment that he's needing to, you know, over the next sort of 24 hours, and you know, hopefully he can be fit tomorrow.
Tom Latham. The Highlanders resume their Super Rugby campaign tonight in Dunedin when they play the South African side, the Stormers. They beat the Blues in the first round but then had a bye, stalling their start to the season. The Stormers have had 1 win from 3 games and were well beaten by the Crusaders last weekend. Paralympian skier Corey Peters will lead the New Zealand team into Pyeongchang Olympic Stadium tonight at the opening ceremony of the Paralympic Winter Games in South Korea. 670 para-athletes from 45 countries will compete at the Games, with New Zealand targeting 2 medals. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the Country Life team meets folk trying to make a fine living out of coarse wool and go a little gaga over a new sheep breed from Switzerland. Something for the weekend is something of a no-show, but then that's the point. Hugh Sunday selects a mixtape, and there's a sonic tonic dedicated to cetaceans, from Flipper to Beached Airs.
And on Lately at 10, we'll have an eye on books, music, people and politics. And of course, we'll be there for the breaking news stories as they happen. We're live and we'll be keeping you up to date with the world, talking to some of the people who have made the news or are just worth talking to. That's Lately with Karen Hay on Nights with Brian Crump on RNZ National.
Met surface weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Kapiti coast, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty and the central high country. Increasing fine spells with isolated showers becoming confined to Northland this afternoon. Gisborne and the Wairoa district, rain with heavy fall south of Tokomaru Bay, easing to showers this evening. For the remainder of Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington, cloudy periods and a few showers, clearing tomorrow afternoon. Inland Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, fine apart from isolated showers about Buller today and tomorrow morning. Coastal Marlborough and Canterbury, mostly cloudy with a few showers today, becoming fine tomorrow morning. Otago and Southland, cloudy periods and isolated showers, clearing this afternoon and becoming fine. And for the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a few showers. It's 5:07 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for being with us. Coming up tonight, we're going to look at this modified version of the TPP, which has been signed. We're going to look at the steel tariffs. We've got some sport tonight. We don't do much sport on Checkpoint, but it's Friday night, a big weekend ahead. So we've got some of that, but we begin tonight with an extraordinary piece of diplomacy between 2 men about whom the D word is very seldom used. Kim Jong-un has invited Donald Trump to North Korea, and while the location is yet to be confirmed, Donald Trump has said the 2 leaders will meet by May. Now, to stress how unlikely and unexpected this was, here's the CNN anchor announcing it as breaking news this afternoon.
And we're back with the breaking news tonight. President Trump agreeing to meet with Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, by May. An unprecedented move and a stunning development in a relationship that has included a volley of nasty insults, right? Leader of North Korea calling Trump a dotard, Trump calling him Little Rocket Man.
Unbelievable stuff. Now Dotard and Little Rocket Man are going to talk. An outcome so unexpected, Rex Tillerson had only just finished ruling it out. We'll talk to a CNN correspondent based at the White House a bit later in the program, but first here's Ryan Brooks from Reuters.
U.S. President Donald Trump will meet Kim Jong-un by this May. That's what South Korea's national security chief said outside the White House Thursday. He came to Washington to relay a message directly from the Supreme Leader himself, an invitation to Trump to discuss North Korea's nuclear program. The security advisor also described a commitment from Kim to denuclearization.
Kim pledged that North Korea will refrain from any further nuclear or missile tests. He understands that the routine joint military exercises between the Republic of Korea and the United States must continue. And he expressed his eagerness to meet President Trump as soon as possible.
Afterward, a U.S. official told reporters Trump was meeting Kim because he is the ultimate decision maker in North Korea. He added, quote, President Trump has made his reputation on making deals. A meeting between the two would be a dramatic diplomatic breakthrough in an ongoing nuclear standoff, the first ever U.S.-North Korea summit. Kim's overture comes after nearly a year of the two sides trading threats and insults, from Trump's warning of fire and fury to Kim considering a missile strike on U.S. territory Guam. However, North Korea has made and then backed off promises like this in the past. It has also resisted getting rid of its nuclear weapons despite global pressure to disarm and international sanctions.
It's Ryan Brooks from Reuters. The BBC's correspondent in Seoul, Laura Bicker, says news of the meeting has been greeted cautiously by South Koreans.
There is a kind of element of, oh my goodness. I think I tweeted it when I tweeted the announcement saying, wow, because we thought this would go forward in baby steps. It's not. It's going in huge leaps. Not only has President Trump accepted this invitation to meet Kim Jong-un, he's going to do it by May. That seems quite a short time away. Now let's look at the risks and rewards associated with this. The rewards are obvious. It could well be that this is a genuine opportunity to speak to North Korea, to try to get rid of nuclear weapons on this peninsula. It's laid right there, and when it comes to the meeting, no sitting US president has ever met the leader of North Korea. It is a huge PR win for Donald Trump, who will believe that his pressure of maximum policy is working. It's also a huge PR win for people here in Seoul, for ministers who have been deftly and diplomatically negotiating these two sides to the table. The potential risks are also huge. It could well be that Kim Jong-un sees this as a propaganda win for himself. Remember, he is incredibly savvy. Those army of beauties, as they're so called, sent to the Winter Olympics, managing to almost upstage the sporting arena. When it comes to dealing with this kind of diplomatic opportunity, he's had years of practice watching his grandfather and his father, who both got to the table and then walked away and continued to build nuclear weapons. So when it comes to the risks for President Trump and President Moon here in Seoul, it could well be that North Korea is playing them. But right now, the rewards outweigh that risk.
Laura Bicker for the BBC in Seoul. Later in the programme, we're going to go to CNN at the White House for the Washington take on this. It's 5:12. It's been more than a decade in the making and prompted many thousands of people to take to the streets in protest against it in New Zealand. But today, the revamped Trans-Pacific Partnership was finally signed in Chile, minus the United States, of course. Trade ministers from the 11 Pacific Rim nations lauded the deal, calling it a powerful signal against protectionism and trade wars. More on that stuff shortly. New Zealand's business community is enthusiastic, saying it will lift incomes and create jobs. But as economics correspondent Patrick O'Mara reports, opponents say their fight isn't over yet.
Trade ministers signed the revised TPP in Chile's capital Santiago, taking a moment to congratulate themselves at getting the deal over the line after Donald Trump pulled the United States out last year. The Chilean Foreign Minister, Geraldo Munoz, says the signing sends a clear political message.
It signals our decisive commitment to trade liberalization, regional integration, economic growth, and job creation.
The commitment to open up markets in a bloc of countries worth a combined $10 trillion came only hours before the US president signed an order to impose steep tariffs on steel and aluminium. The Trade Minister, David Parker, says the contrasting views on trade spoke volumes.
We see the rise in protectionism as a bad thing for the world, a bad thing for New Zealand, and it actually makes the relative importance of
the agreement will eliminate more than 95%
greater.
of all tariffs over time and add an estimated $1.2 to $4 billion, or up to 1% to the New Zealand economy. The gains might sound modest, but the impact for some industries could be huge. Beef and Lamb's Rowena Hume cites the lucrative Japanese market, where beef exporters have experienced a sharp drop in sales since the country inked a free trade deal with Australia in 2015.
In the last couple of years, since Australia's FTA entered into force with Japan, their beef exports have increased by about $1 billion, while ours have gone down by about $50 million. So the market's been growing, but we've been losing a lot of market share.
Kiwi fruit and vegetable exporters will also enjoy a level playing field with foreign rivals in Japan, with Chilean kiwi fruit and Australian apples taking a bite out of returns to New Zealand growers. Richard Palmer from Horticulture New Zealand says standardising health safety rules for perishable goods across 11 nations will also bolster expansion plans.
Having an agreement that enables us to get recognition rather than meeting the requirements of 10 different countries, having a mechanism to agree that New Zealand's process meets export markets requirements is really important to making it feasible for us to export.
The $1.7 billion a year wine sector is eyeing expansion, particularly in Japan and the rest of Asia. Philip Gregan, the chief executive of industry body New Zealand Wine Growers, says a key development is the mutual recognition of regulations, which gets rid of any unnecessary block to selling overseas.
A number of the Asian countries have, can I put it this way, quite sort of old-fashioned wine standards, and we've been working very hard to try and bring those into a 21st century model, and I think TPP is going to help with that a lot.
But opponents argue the revised trade pact is just the old deal with a new name, and it remains bad for workers, consumers and the environment. It's Our Future's Oliver Hales says they'll fight on and urges the public to voice their concerns as Parliament now considers passing the controversial pact into law.
With a view to get people back on the street, to get people putting pressure on Labour and New Zealand First and letting them know that they know things haven't changed.
It's unlikely to make much difference, with the National Party all but certain to join Labour and New Zealand First in ratifying the agreement, which the government hopes to do by early next year at the latest. The new TPP won't enter into force until it's ratified by at least half of the 11 nations involved. For Checkpoint, Patrick O'Mara.
Well, from a trade agreement to threats of trade wars. And that is, of course, because the American President Donald Trump has made good on a campaign promise to support US steel workers and the US steel industry by announcing steep new tariffs on steel imports. The move comes despite the EU and China threatening to retaliate, global warnings of a potential trade war. Mr. Trump did backtrack on his previous no-exemption stance, announcing Mexico and Canada will be excluded from the tariffs, and there will be some flexibility, not defined, for what he calls friendly countries. What's it all mean? Here's the BBC's Nick Bryant.
History is often written with a presidential pen, and with steel workers who helped put him in the White House at his shoulder. Donald Trump added his name to a signature campaign promise, putting America first by imposing tariffs on foreign steel and aluminium.
The American steel and aluminum industry has been ravaged by aggressive foreign trade practices. It's really an assault on our country. The workers who poured their souls into building this great nation were betrayed, but that betrayal is now over.
Defending America's industrial heartland has prompted his most protectionist move yet, one that strikes a blow against globalization, the integrated system of worldwide commerce from which these Rust Belt communities feel excluded.
American steel. American steel. American steel.
A promise made, a promise kept.
Wait till you see what I'm going to do for steel.
Now it's time for action.
It's the glut of steel produced in China that's angered the president, but that accounts for just 2% of US steel imports. Bigger importers such as Canada and Mexico are initially exempted. European Union countries could be hard hit.
President Trump has recently said, and I quote, "Trade wars are good and easy to win." But the truth is quite the opposite. Trade wars are bad and easy to lose.
Harley-Davidson, the quintessential Middle America brand, and for that very reason a likely target for EU retaliation. Trump supporters in key battleground states like Wisconsin could be caught in the crossfire.
A trade war won't benefit anybody.
I generally believe in free trade, and I don't think he's serious about it regardless. I think he's just trying to scare people into getting some concessions, which is how he rolls.
It's too late to save old steel mills in Pennsylvania, and many senior Republicans fear that this act of economic nationalism could also be an act of national self-harm. And all this comes on a day when 11 Pacific Rim countries have signed a landmark trade agreement, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was pushed by the Obama administration as a counterweight to China. but which the Trump administration pulled out of last year. It really does feel like a landmark moment, a milestone moment for the international system. And once again, America First has left America alone.
The BBC's Nick Bryant reporting. A man who was jailed for more than 11 years for shooting at 3 police officers in Whangarei, Northland, and stealing 2 cars, including a patrol car, apologised to them and the New Zealand public. Joshua Kite appeared for sentencing at the High Court in Auckland today, and Eva Corlett was there.
Joshua Kite's offending began on August 26, 2016, when he fled after failing to stop for a patrol car in Whangarei. After crashing his car on Campbell Road, he fired at police before stealing an unmarked police car and then another vehicle. Kite abandoned the police car in Maungatoroto, which was then locked down. He was then spotted in Kaiwaka, but he wasn't arrested until September the 1st, when he was found hiding in the South Auckland suburb of Manurewa. The Crown lawyer Henry Steele said Kite's offending was extremely serious.
This man was driving in possession of a loaded rifle while on the run. He had obviously made the decision to arm himself, and the only credible explanation for arming himself in those circumstances is to use that weapon to avoid apprehension.
Kite pleaded guilty in December to a host of charges, including drug possession, car theft, firing at police officers and impersonating a police officer. Members of his family sat in the gallery of the High Court today, wiping away tears as Kite apologised to the police, especially those he shot at, the public and his children. The father of 3 described how he was scared of being thrown back in prison and did all he could to exit the situation he'd got himself into. Kite left prison in 2015, where he'd been serving a sentence for aggravated robbery. His lawyer, Annabelle Creswell, said he re-entered the community with high motivation to succeed and reconnect with his family, but he lacked proper support.
It's likely he had not yet established robust community supports and routines within Auckland, and over time, and having experienced some negative incidents and challenges and reintegrating, it's likely that Mr Kite became disillusioned and gravitated back to an antisocial peer group.
When delivering the sentence, Justice Hinton said it was a great relief that no officers were harmed when Kite shot at them. She said the police and his other victims had been traumatised by his actions. Justice Hinton said Kite had the opportunity to make a fresh start and had squandered it.
You said you were determined to stay out of prison on your release in 2015 for the sake of your children and your family. You managed that for about a year and then blew it in a spectacular and shocking fashion.
Justice Hinton said Kite's 4 previous aggravated robbery convictions showed he had a propensity for violence and added 9 months to his sentence. But she said his guilty plea, genuine remorse and letters from family were mitigating factors. Justice Hinton said Kite could benefit from rehabilitation.
While rehabilitative programs might not have been successful in the past, there is no reason to suggest that you did not properly engage with them, nor that you will not properly engage and perhaps find success in that in the future.
Justice Hinton sentenced Kite to 4 years in prison for drug charges and another 7.5 for the other charges. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Eva Corlett, tēnei.
5:23. A tramper has had a lucky escape after being rescued by an emergency beacon set off by somebody else who then switched it off. 2 trampers, one unable to walk with a badly injured leg and in a bit of a tight spot, were rescued from Mount Aspiring last night, but neither of them knew each other, neither of them knew the other tramper was there, and only one was carrying a locator beacon. This really was a very lucky rescue indeed. Sam Innes from Southern Lake Helicopters was the man who was flying the chopper in.
We arrived up there in the dark, well just on dark, just as it's getting properly dark, and we arrived at the coordinates that we'd been given for the approximate location of the beacon, and we have tracking gear on the helicopter that can track the beacon. But when we arrived there, I couldn't pick it up. There was no signal at all from anything. So I ran back to the office just to query whether or not it was a spot tracker, which is another type of tracker people have, because I couldn't pick it up. But anyway, to cut a long story short, very shortly after that, as we were still looking around the area, trying to pick this beacon up, the paramedic in the back tapped me on the shoulder and said that he could see a light down in the creek. So we turned around, I looked down, and sure enough, there's a light down there blinking, like a little SOS light blinking at us out of the river there. So we went down and landed down there. Luckily, we could land very close to it. We didn't have to winch a guy down to it. So we landed very close and went across, had a chat with the guy, and realised quite quickly that he hadn't sent out a distress call. He had no beacon with him, and he hadn't talked to anybody or met anybody that could have sent a distress call out for him. So, pretty quickly realised that we'd just randomly stumbled across an injured guy just by pure chance, really.
So he was in a spot of bother, right? He didn't have a beacon, but he had broken his leg or something close to it and was really struggling to get out to where the people were. So it was his incredible good fortune that somebody else with a beacon had got you into the area, and he was able to attract your attention with his torch. But in the meantime, the person with the beacon, where were they?
So he was incredibly fortunate. It's a huge part of the country, as you can imagine. So the person that had set the beacon off, she was located. We located her later on that evening. It took us a while to find her because she had actually turned the beacon off. She'd got herself into a spot of bother getting up to one of the alpine huts there, and set her beacon off. But after sitting there for some time, managed to get herself out of where she was and up to the hut, and then she turned it off, which made it very hard for us to track where she was if she turned it off. So, it was just through pure good luck that we came across the other chap.
And so how much trouble would the other chap have been in if she hadn't got you to him by using a beacon that wasn't intended for him?
I'm not sure, to be honest. He certainly was in for, he would have been there certainly all last night and possibly most of today. There's not much chance of him walking out. He was quite injured. Like, I'm not sure if he'd broken his ankle or very badly strained it anyway, but he certainly couldn't walk anyway. So he was in for quite an ordeal, I would say.
So two really good messages here. One is always have a beacon, particularly when you're in a place like Mount Aspiring, which can be some really testing terrain, obviously. And message number two is, when you switch the beacon on, thus attracting the rescue helicopter, leave the damn thing on.
Yeah, please don't turn it off. It makes it very hard to find if you turn it off. But I think the thing that people may not appreciate is once they have activated it, they've started quite a chain of events, and we're not going to stop until we find them, even if they do turn it off. Just for our own peace of mind, we don't like to leave an area just in case the machine's got a flat battery or broken down or something.
Yeah, right.
We always do like to find it. So, even if you switch it off, we'll keep looking.
And did you carry them both out? Did you lift them both out?
Yeah, so we did. We flew them both out to the Lake District Hospital in Queenstown and left them there with the medics there. And
I'm sure they were very grateful to you, but was he grateful to her?
I'm not sure. I presume they had a chat at the hospital, and I'm sure he would have been. He was certainly very grateful for us, and he couldn't quite believe his good fortune that he saw the helicopter from a great height, and he just flashed his torch at it with really no hope of attracting our attention, but just through good luck we managed to spot him.
Sam Innes, on a somewhat serendipitous rescue, choppers have been busy around the country. The 100 or so tourists trapped at Blue Duck Station near Taumaranui yesterday have been rescued by helicopter this afternoon. Backpackers on a bus tour, kayakers paddling the Whanganui River, and cyclists doing the Tour Aotearoa were among those who got stuck for the night. Quite a large group there. They're all relieved to be out. Laura Dooney reports.
From 1 o'clock this afternoon, 5 helicopters worked to get the tourists out from the station after it became obvious that clearing away via the road was going to take too long. Ruapehu Emergency Management Officer Nick Watson says there was a mixed response from people coming off the helicopters.
The younger ones were fine, and they've already got on their buses and they've left to go to Wellington. They were really excited about the trip and all the excitement they've had. We've now got the older generation who have gone in there as bikers or canoeists. They're very much shell-shocked about it all, and we're just looking after their welfare needs now. There's about 12 to 13 of them that we'll look after.
Nick Watson says the people in that group will be put up locally and transport will be arranged so they can continue their tours or go back home. Mr Watson says about 10 people who run the lodge are still there and supplies will be choppered in. Meanwhile, at the lodge itself, owner Dan Steele says the tourists were in good spirits overnight despite the conditions. The station often accommodates more than 100 people, but without power and water, it was important to evacuate them as quickly as possible. Dan Steele says his business is based on farming, tourism and honey, and all three rely on the road.
Obviously no tourists can come in, so our income stops. We can't shift our stock very far because there's thousands of slips on the property, and so we've got hungry stock we've got to try to get feed to and try and get through slips and things, which is obviously very difficult because the slips are sticky, deep mud, and we've got to try and protect our stock and get them all healthy and happy. And so the whole place financially grinds to a halt, and you've just got a massive clean-up job in front of you.
Dan Steele says the road should be open to four-wheel drive vehicles, but it and its bridges are structurally damaged. Nick Watson agrees it will be a while before the road into the area is back to normal.
We've got a geotechnical engineer and a roading engineer who are currently down there from this morning. They were flown in this morning, and they're doing surveys to make sure that, to see what sort of engineering design needs to be done to the road to get it back to normal.
Nick Watson says now the tourists are safe, opening that road up is the main priority. For Checkpoint, Laura Dooney.
Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. Coming up on the program before 6, outrage from locals after Air New Zealand cans its service between Kapiti and Auckland. The biggest clash of the Super Rugby season so far will take place tomorrow with joint favourites, the Hurricanes and Crusaders, going into battle in Wellington. Could be a cracker. And after 28 years of Treaty of Waitangi negotiations, Ngāti Rangi will sign its deed of settlement in Waihuru tomorrow. We'd love your feedback. You can text us 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook Checkpoint with John Campbell, where you can watch us too, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Nona has business news to end the week with next, but before it all, KB with the headlines.
Residents in 13 homes in Tauranga have been told to evacuate their houses immediately because they're dangerous. The homes are part of a development by the failed company Bella Vista Homes. It went into liquidation in November, leaving the development unfinished. The Tauranga City Council says it's had to act urgently because it's had advice from a geotechnical specialist that the properties are not safe. The US President Donald Trump has accepted the invitation to meet with the North Korean leader at a place and time to be determined. Kim Jong-un extended the invitation through a South Korean delegation which visited Pyongyang and Washington this week. Mr. Kim has pledged to halt nuclear weapons tests in order to secure the meeting. The business community is backing the newly signed Trans-Pacific Partnership. New Zealand and 10 other Pacific Rim nations confirmed the agreement in Chile this morning, with trade ministers calling it a powerful signal against protectionism and trade wars. The pact is estimated to add to $1.2 to $4 billion to the economy, mainly through lower tariffs and other barriers. The Department of Corrections has apologised to 2 South Auckland schools which were not told about sex offenders living nearby for at least 2 years. 11 offenders, including 8 sex offenders, are living in 2 boarding houses less than a kilometre from at least 2 Otahuhu schools. The department says the sex offenders can walk around the neighbourhood, but they are GPS monitored, and if they go into exclusion zones like parks and schools, the department will respond swiftly. The Otaki MP, Nathan Guy, says Air New Zealand's shock announcement it's axing its Kapiti to Auckland service is short-sighted as the route has been popular and profitable. The airline has announced the final flight on the route will be on April the 3rd.
The owner of the Paraparaumu Airport, Todd Property, says it's considering the announcement and what it means for the airport. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thanks very much. Yes, we'll have more on that service between Kapiti and Auckland coming up. Let's turn to business news now, though. Nona, hi Nona.
Hello.
The latest ASB Regional Economic Scoreboard shows the rural sector is outperforming urban regions when it comes to economic growth. Now, this is a kind of fascinating little assembly of telltale signs, right?
Yeah, so basically the ASB has been looking at regional economic growth, and that's like all the regions, and seeing how they're doing against each other. So this is about growth, not necessarily the size of the contribution, but whether or not they're growing or not. And what it's showing is that the regions are outpacing the urban centres in terms of economic growth, which is kind of, people would think, oh, that's sort of a surprise. But no, our economy is very much a rural focus. Yeah.
In some cases, this is growth from a relatively low base. This is quite poor regions.
Some of them.
Yeah, up. But what are the factors that are leading this?
Well, it's tourism. And so, of course, tourists are not spending all their money in Auckland and Wellington or Christchurch. They're spending their money in Nelson and Marlborough and Tasman. They're going down to Otago. They're, so those tourist areas are doing very well. As well, the dairy sector has come back. And agriculture.
Not much dairy farming in Auckland, Wellington,
well,
Christchurch.
No, there's not much of that. And also, part of the problem with Auckland is that it's slipped down to near, it's way down, 13 in the list, so it's not anywhere near the top, and it's down 4 points.
13 out of how many? 14, 15, 16?
Yeah.
Bloody
so
hell,
it's
Auckland.
Well down
Come
there.
on, Auckland.
Yeah, Auckland, you're way down there. Now, part of the reason is that we don't have capacity to even welcome more tourists. So if you have a hotel in Auckland, you're doing well because you can fill your rooms every night, but you can't get any more visitors in, you just don't have any more room. So no room at the inn.
Right.
And that no vacancy sign makes a big difference when it comes to economic growth.
Who's number one?
Number one is Tasman. They moved up, and they got the gold star. Otago has made it up with bronze.
I'm sounding like Casey Kasem doing the American Top 40. Who's the biggest mover?
Marlborough.
Right.
Yeah, all that wine. People are loving it. And, it's not surprising. Like, recently we heard that New Zealand has become the third largest importer. The United States importing most of their wine comes from Italy, France, and New Zealand.
Sauvignon Blanc, right, which is the great Marlborough Groves.
Yes,
Not only,
and
but
that's
that is
value.
Still number one in the US and Daylight second, I think. Yeah.
It's quite a long, it's good. So anyways,
fascinating.
It's pretty interesting. And what's also interesting is that Wellington is down on the bottom, but it's showing some strength. It's number 10th.
It's above Auckland. Wellington is all like that.
Yeah, but it was 16 before. It's moving up.
Right.
Wellington's moving. And Canterbury's got lots of opportunity for expansion.
And down the bottom there...
West Coast. Okay, let's not talk about that too much.
But Bruce Smith, did you hear Bruce Smith on Morning Report this morning?
No, I did not.
Talking about sheep's balls and the opportunity to eat. I think that West Coast will be having a boom weekend.
Sheep balls.
Oh, it was magnificent.
Okay, I don't think we have that on our list of economic
that'll be a big driver on the West Coast, I think. Thanks, Nona. How did the markets end the week?
Well, really good, actually. Funny, you would have thought all this trade talk, but really what's made the markets very happy in Asia is the discussion that potentially might happen between the world leaders of North Korea and the United States. Donald Trump, yes. He's doing other things than talking about trade. They might actually meet.
Yeah, we covered that at the time. We're going to go back to CNN in Washington later. But
so along with the rest of the region, our index rose nearly 0.4%, up 31 points. To 8,390, pretty strong finish to the week. Kiwi dollar 72.7 US cents, 93.3 Australian, 52.6 pence.
Nona Peltier, thank you very much. Have a wonderful weekend.
And you.
Nona, what is the weather going to be like for the weekend? Well, let's find out. Let's go to the Met Service meteorologist, John Law. Kia ora, John.
Kia ora, the weekend is here, and for many of us it is looking like a fairly fine and settled story. Up north on Saturday there's plenty of dry weather across towards Northland and Auckland. Temperatures back down to around about 14 degrees Celsius to start things off, but highs of 24 degrees Celsius for Auckland City. There's plenty of dry weather across the North Island and plenty of fine weather as well, albeit rather a cool start in places like Taupo, 8 degrees Celsius, but a fine story for many places on the North Island. There'll be a few early showers around the likes of Wellington to kick the day off, but we will find it brightens up nicely through the afternoon. The showers fade away and a fine afternoon in store. A few showers that still lingering as well on that eastern coast, especially up towards Napier and up in towards Gisborne as well. They'll clear off through the afternoon, and there's plenty of dry weather with us as we go through in towards Sunday. Now down south on Saturday, a great looking day in Canterbury and Christchurch. A bit of early morning cloud and a few spots of patchy drizzle. That'll clear off, and a fine looking afternoon in Christchurch. Highs here, 17 degrees Celsius. And there's plenty of dry and fine weather across the Southland. A little bit more cloud feeding back in towards the far southern parts, and a cooler feeling start today for Invercargill. Temperatures there 2 degrees Celsius, but climbing to highs of 16 degrees Celsius as we go through the afternoon. That high pressure stays with us for Sunday. Plenty more fine and dry weather, but keep an eye on the forecast. Could be some pretty unsettled weather to start next week, particularly across the North Island. That's it from me.
Thanks, John. Have a great weekend. Air New Zealand's shock announcement today that it's cancelling all flights between Kapiti Coast and Auckland. That airport, what is it, about 45 minutes, a bit more, north of Wellington, depending on traffic. It's left the Kapiti region reeling, really. Locals say the demand is there and they feel abandoned by the airline, which, of course, has a big state shareholding. Our reporter Katie Doyle travelled to the Kapiti Coast and spoke to residents.
Air New Zealand's decision to stop flights between Kapiti and Auckland has shocked Kapiti business and residents, who say they feel deserted by the part government-owned airline. Kapiti Coast Mayor Kay Gurunathan says he's disgusted he was only told of the suspension last night.
Air New Zealand is a national flag carrier. The branding of Air New Zealand is the branding of New Zealand. I can't see how they could treat a local community in this appalling manner. A private corporation would treat its stakeholders much better than this.
He says Air New Zealand's behaviour is particularly bizarre, given the airline attended an open day at Kapiti Airport last week.
1,000 people came streaming through to look, and the Air New Zealand plane Q300 was parked in the tarmac. People went through looking at all that, and the Air New Zealand was dishing out sausage sizzle, and then, a few days later they're telling us, hello, goodbye. What is this?
The Kapiti Chamber of Commerce co-chair Julianne Hope says she's been working with Air New Zealand since 2017 to ensure demand for the service didn't fall. She thought demand had kept up with supply during that time.
It just sounds like they've stretched themselves around the country. So we'd really hope that another service might pick up this region. And until those discussions happen, we're at a loss.
Ms Hope says the decision has left her shell-shocked, and Kapiti residents feel the same. Sharon Walker says she's gutted at the decision.
It's a great service to have here. I think for business, my husband's a business traveller, and the times were never quite right for him to get up to Auckland. But, it's nice to know he's flying home here to Kapiti tonight after flying out of Wellington today. So it's nice to know on a Friday night he's not going to sit in traffic for a couple of hours trying to get home. He can get straight back to us.
Another resident said she felt Air New Zealand, which had been flying between Auckland and Kapiti since 2011, had misled the whole community.
To have an open day the other day and have everybody there, what were they doing with an open day, and then next week announced that they're pulling out?
Mayor Kay Gurunathan says Air New Zealand's shock move wasn't fair to the people who rely on its services.
I'm asking the Chief Executive of Air New Zealand to explain to me what's the game plan. If you're seeing the country as a major chessboard where you have jigsaws of what you got to do, that's fine, but treat us well. This is appalling.
Air New Zealand didn't respond to RNZ's request for comment, but said in a statement that it decided to end the service in order to prioritise other areas which have more growing customer demand. Only 2 other airlines, Air2 and Sounds Air, operate commercial flights on the route. The last Air New Zealand flight between Kapiti and Auckland is on the 3rd of April. For Checkpoint, I'm Katie Doyle.
We're hearing from lots of people on the Kapiti Coast, and they're basically saying to us, gosh, the flights are expensive relative to flying in and out of Wellington, which is not that far away. Thank you for your feedback. We'll have a sample of it later. But first, after 28 years of Treaty of Waitangi negotiations, Central North Island iwi, Ngāti Rangi, will sign its deed of settlement tomorrow in Waitangi. The iwi, which stretches from the southern slopes of Mount Ruapehu to Waihuru, Ohakune and Taihape, will receive $17 million in compensation. Hundreds of Ngāti Rangi whānau will gather at a marae for the signing and to hear the Crown's apology for the alienation of its land, resources and culture. Te Mana Kōrehi reporter John Boynton has more.
Over.
Ngāti Rangi lead treaty negotiator Che Wilson composed a special new Waiata Āringa or action song for tomorrow's deed of settlement signing.
Te mai
Mount Ruapehu, Che Wilson says, takes centre stage in the Waiata.
Our affectionate term for Mount Ruapehu is koro Ruapehu. And so when you're in the shadow of Mount Ruapehu, Western worldview will see a shadow as something dark, but you can only have a shadow if there's light. And so when we're in his shadow, we're in his protection.
And tomorrow, under the protective shadow of koro Ruapehu, the Crown will apologise to the iwi for its breaches of the Treaty of Waitangi.
It's a day that has culminated in 28 years of sacrifice to go through this process. It's going to be an awesome day, a sad day as we remember all of those that worked so hard and never got to see the fruits of their labour.
The commercial redress of the settlement is valued at $17 million, money which can be used to buy back Crown land in the Karioi forest. Sites of cultural significance, including the beds of the Rotokura Lakes near Mount Ruapehu, will also be returned to the iwi. Che Wilson says under the settlement, a river entity will be set up to look after the health of the Whangaehu River.
It's got a statutory recognition, which is the highest level of recognition for any natural feature other than the legal personality that the Whanganui River and the Urewera have.
Ngāti Rangi Trust Chair Shah Amna was also a negotiator for the tribe, following in the footsteps of his grandfather, Mark Gray. And he's happy his grandfather will be able to see the conclusion of the settlement.
It's going to be quite an emotional day as we reflect on the journey. Although this is the end of this part of the journey and there's still a lot more to go, it's going to be very, very special and just really looking forward to it. Economic
hardship, Shah Amna says, was a small part of what the iwi lost.
And our cultural identity was also taken at the same time, from a confiscation perspective. And through this, we've been able to now reinvigorate that.
Treaty Negotiations Minister Andrew Little will attend his first deed of settlement signing in his new role.
I know for iwi, when they get to this point, this is a very big and special occasion. And for the Minister, as Minister, I feel very privileged to be part of it.
Iwi is one of many included in the Kāhui Maunga Collective, which will now turn its attention to the settlement of Mount Ruapehu and the Tongariro National Park. Andrew Little says it will take time to settle the claim with the Kāhui Maunga Collective.
All those iwi, they've got their own settlements to get done, and then on the collective issues like the National Park, then we can draw those together and get a collective settlement on that issue.
Che Wilson expects negotiations to begin late this year.
We're looking forward to settling the mountain as well at the appropriate time with our neighbours, with our other whanaunga, the other iwi of the Kāhui Maunga.
After the deed of settlement is signed, it will then go through Parliament to be passed into law. O te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko John Boynton aho.
30 minutes to 6, 12 and a half, in fact. What? Is it the biggest clash of the Super Rugby season so far? Must be close. Takes place in Wellington tomorrow night with joint favourites, the Hurricanes and Crusaders, doing battle in a mouth-watering local derby. For the Hurricanes, it's their first home game of the season. Week 1 South Africa, Week 2 South America. Not the kind of trip teams normally return from in top order. The Crusaders, on the other hand, have been at home in Christchurch and winning. But the Hurricanes need the victory, and as Joe Porter reports, it's a special night for Hurricanes first five Beauden Barrett, who'll play his 100th game for the club.
And there goes the final whistle. Perenara will belt it away into touch. And the Crusaders have lost their unbeaten record in the last match of the regular season.
Last year, the Crusaders conquered all before them except the Hurricanes, who ruined what would have been a perfect season for coach Scott Robertson's champions.
Good learning for us. Got us some good stead going into those finals football, and for us, we took that learning as a chance to end up winning the competition. So that was at the right time. They deserved that win, and it's a new year and a new group, and this is what we play. These big games. Look, the Hurricanes and Crusaders have always had massive games.
However, more recent history is on the Crusaders' side. They opened their campaign with a convincing win over the Chiefs in Christchurch before brushing aside the Stormers at the same venue. The Hurricanes, however, fell to a shock loss to the Bulls in Pretoria before beating the Jaguars in a far from flawless performance in Buenos Aires, and assistant coach John Plumtree says tomorrow night's match is a must-win. You don't want to drop those home games, and it's obviously a derby game as well, and it's a game we've got to win because we've got to keep applying the pressure at the top of the conference and the table as well. So we feel like we've got off to a pretty average start. We've got to go out and perform in front of our fans on the weekend. The game has been robbed of an enticing matchup between Beauden Barrett and one of the contenders for his All Blacks throne, the Crusaders' first five, Richie Mo'unga, who's set for a lengthy spell on the sidelines after having surgery on a broken jaw. The former Island international, now Crusaders assistant coach Ronan O'Gara, believes Barrett is so talented he could usurp Dan Carter as the best first five of all time.
He fills grounds, he excites people. It's everything good about rugby is what Beauden Barrett does. And, you know, he's probably nearly redefined number 10 play. I think Dan was still is probably the best 10 in the world overall decades. But Beauden Barrett is very exciting and potentially go on to challenge him for that title. So by God is he up there.
Barrett will bring up 100 games for the Hurricanes, and with brother Geordie alongside him and brother Scott against him, it will be a Barrett family affair at Westpac Stadium.
Growing up, I remember Dad playing for the club, so it was always a dream to play our game for the Hurricanes, and for it to be my 100th this weekend is very special, and my family will be there. We've got Scott there in the opposition, so it'll be a great family occasion.
And Barrett concedes the result of the match could shape the rest of their season.
You can look at it as being double points. These home derbies are sort of like that. Yeah, we want to play well and win ultimately. They are the defending champs, are the benchmark at the moment. They've had two good wins, so we know we're up against it.
The bookies can't split the teams this weekend. While form suggests the defending champs will get up, history and home advantage go with the Hurricanes. Plumtree says a win would be a massive confidence boost for his side and believes the result will hinge on a few crucial moments.
Local derbies are always great spectacles, and they bring out the best in each other, these teams, and they're high tempo, they're physical, they sort of have it all. There's big moments in the games, and there's a lot of mate versus mate situations out there, and the rivalry's been pretty intense, and I think it's a game that everyone looks forward to.
While tomorrow's match in Wellington is the pick of the round, the Highlanders and Blues are also in action, the former hosting the Stormers in Dunedin tonight, with the latter taking on the Lions in Johannesburg. Mō te hōtaka o te ahipo nei, ko Joe Porter aho.
The Crusaders Christchurch-based team, of course, and let's head there where Victoria Square, the slightly less famous cousin of nearby Cathedral Square, was reopened today after having $7.5 million worth of earthquake repairs completed. Now, excellent reporter Conan Young went along to the opening.
Remodelled in the late 1980s, Victoria Square was one of the few parts of the central city left largely unscathed by the earthquakes. Enter the government's Earthquake Recovery Authority and plans for a radical redesign of this much-beloved meeting place, involving moving mature trees from its centre and pushing historic statues to the edge. The No Need for Change campaign was started and saw yellow ribbons tied to the trees in protest. Organiser Mark Gerard said the groundswell of opposition showed how important this place was to people.
I had numerous conversations and all sorts of people talk about radio, letters to the editor, just saying, yes, we want to save it. And it really was. I mean, like going over the counter buying yellow ribbon and people saying, no, they can't change it. And people didn't sort of think about it. They said, no, don't change it. We've got to keep it.
This heritage campaigner is happy the government relented and agreed to instead return the square to its former glory.
In 1989, they put this design through, which I think has been a stunning success as urban design. And it's a space that everybody loves because it's a wonderful green space in the central city. And it's even more important now because if you look around, we've got all this construction in the central city rebuild, and here's this wonderful space that's relatively untouched. You can sit, rest and just watch the rebuild and then go back into it.
The head of the Earthquake Recovery Authority's replacement, or Takoro, Albert Brantley, says there were a lot of opinions over what should happen to the square.
Sarah listened to those. We redesigned it and set up a reference group to make sure that it was compatible with what the people of Christchurch wanted, and I think we've delivered on what they wanted.
As part of the restoration, the famous Boca fountain was repaired, along with its coloured lights. The first electric fountain in Australasia was donated to the city by early settler Henry Boca in 1921. His great-great-niece, Jane Stace, has some strong childhood memories of it.
We used to drive in here, and of course that's when Victoria Street drove down the middle of the square, and of course we were always fascinated, and here was this fountain, you know, and it had our name, Boca, and of course at night, beautiful lights, yeah, and you know, as a child, magic, yeah, like magic.
Jane Stace says with much of the city now unrecognisable, it's great to hold on to some of what the old city used to look like. In Ototahi for Checkpoint, ko Konanyang tēnei.
Well, at the end of a week in which we've looked long and hard, and there's more to come next week at the Canterbury Home Repair Programme and its aftermath, including 316 cases against EQC that are currently before the courts, we briefly want to add one final contribution. The week began with us hearing from Stuart Smith, Jerry Brownlee's successor as National's EQC spokesperson, on the matter of managed repairs to quake-damaged properties. I asked him if any liability sits with Fletcher Construction.
Well, I believe it does. That's my understanding. So EQC had an arrangement with for the managed repairs through Fletcher's, and so they hired them to do work. If it's not up to standard and didn't meet what was paid for, then there's recourse through the courts for that.
So Stuart Smith on Monday thought EQC should sue Fletcher's if there's evidence of large volumes of substandard work. But that night we obtained a copy of the contract to run the project management office between Fletcher Construction and EQC, in which EQC provides Fletcher's with indemnity against liability for, and I quote, all costs and expenses FCC may suffer, and for any claim made against FCC in connection with any of the works. Fletcher Construction's former Infrastructure Chief Executive Mark Binns signed that contract for Fletcher. He spoke to us on Tuesday night. I asked him if he would have signed the contract if it did mean Fletcher's had liability.
No, I wouldn't. And, that matter did get discussed. During the negotiations, there was some pushback from either EQC or Mr Brownlee's office, I can't remember which, to be honest, in which they asked Fletcher Construction to take on a higher degree of risk. And I was just not prepared to put Fletcher Construction in a position where we had to take on a huge, massive subcontractor base to undertake the work. As I explained previously, large construction contractors usually have preferred groups of subcontractors that they know they can rely on when doing a large project. But this was so massive, we were going to have to take on resources that we had never worked with before. Obviously, some of these subcontract resources coming in from offshore. And the risk that we would be taking relative to the fee meant that it was an absolutely stupid commercial decision to accept that liability. And at the end of the day, that position was accepted by EQC and the government.
Mark Binns, so the CEO who signed the contract with EQC told us they're indemnified against liability, full stop. But Jerry Brownlee, who was the minister when the contract was signed and who doesn't talk to us, had this to say to RNZ's Christchurch reporter Conan Young.
You can't recall whether or not Fletcher Construction was liable for any mistakes made?
I know that there were concerns about where liabilities would lie when they were in a management position, and it was there would be numerous trades and numerous other businesses, hundreds actually, if not thousands, that would be involved in that big repair program. But the Building Act sits over all of that.
And last night we spoke to Sid Miller, EQC CEO since February 2017. Now, next week we'll examine what EQC knew and when about how badly some repairs were off mark. But Sid Miller told us last night EQC had indeed sought legal advice on action against Fletcher's.
I've had legal advice, and the advice that I've received is that Fletcher's do have a liability.
What liability have you been told Fletcher's have?
Fletcher's have liability from the point of view of delivering the services of a PMO.
But there are so many exclusions in the PMO, aren't there? FCC is not responsible for A, the design of the works, B, the construction of any works, C, work of any contractor or consultant, or the goods or services supplied by any merchants.
John, the legal advice I've had is Fletcher's have an obligation in terms of delivering their services as a PMO.
EQC CEO Sid Miller. Today, a statement from Fletcher Building itself Somewhat out of the blue, really, it reads, Fletcher Construction entered into an agreement with EQC in April 2011 to operate the Project Management Office, PMO, for the Canterbury Home Repair Programme. Under this agreement, EQC is responsible for the scoping of repairs and contracting directly with the contractors who carry out repairs for homeowners. FCC did not have any direct contractual relationship with contractors or homeowners. Specifically, under the PMO agreement, FCC is not responsible for design, construction or work performed by EQC's contractors. FCC was responsible for the PMO, which managed the process on behalf of EQC as EQC's agent. We believe we have complied with our obligations under the PMO agreement. We have always been committed to helping EQC resolve homeowner concerns. Stay tuned. More on that to come next week. Air New Zealand leaving Kapiti, says this listener, ridiculous. Morning travel to Wellington Airport from Kapiti now takes 2 hours, 10 minutes. Good God, does it? When leaving at 6:10 on a weekday morning, so it's simply not feasible on a regular basis. The only winner will be Palmerston North Airport, an hour 15 from Kapiti.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. Residents in 13 homes in Tauranga have been told to evacuate their houses immediately because they're dangerous. The homes are part of a development by the failed company Bella Vista Homes. The Tauranga City Council says it's had to act urgently because it's had advice from a geotechnical specialist that the properties are not safe. The council's chief executive, Gary Poole, says it's worried if bad weather from Cyclone Holler arrives on Monday, some of the properties would not survive the storm. The council says it's arranging temporary accommodation for the homeowners. Bella Vista Homes went into liquidation in November, leaving the development unfinished. A tramper with a badly injured leg is lucky to have been rescued from Mount Aspiring by a helicopter crew searching for an emergency beacon set off by somebody else. Rescue pilot Sam Innes from Southern Lake Helicopters told Checkpoint he arrived at the mountain in the dark last night and started searching but couldn't find any trace of the emergency signal. He says the paramedic on board then spotted a light from the riverbed and found the injured man.
He couldn't quite believe his good fortune that He saw the helicopter from a great height, and he just flashed his torch at it with really no hope of attracting our attention. But just through good luck, we managed to spot him.
Sam Innes says the tramper who had set off the beacon after getting into trouble had switched it off once she reached the safety of a hut. He says once they found her, she was also airlifted to Lakes District Hospital. North Korea has not yet issued any official comment on the invitation from its leader to the US president to hold talks. Donald Trump has said he'll accept the unprecedented invitation from Kim Jong-un for a summit. The message was delivered by South Korean officials visiting Washington, and they say Mr. Kim has also agreed to halt nuclear and missile tests and is committed to denuclearization. It appears to be a major breakthrough after months of threats and violence from both leaders. Mr. Trump says the development is great progress, but sanctions will remain in place until a firm agreement is reached. North Korean media has made no comment yet. Air New Zealand's announcement that it's suspending all flights between the Kapiti Coast and Auckland has left residents fuming. The Kapiti Coast Mayor, Kay Gurunathan, says he only found out about the suspension less than 24 hours before the official announcement. Katie Doyle reports.
This morning, Kapiti residents woke to the news they would be losing their direct link to Auckland. One resident told RNZ she felt the community had been lied to, given the airline attended an open day at Kapiti Airport last week, where it displayed an aeroplane and ran a sausage sizzle. Mayor Kay Gurunathan says he's appalled by the bizarre handling of the situation, which saw him notified less than 24 hours before Air New Zealand released the plan. But he says the community will continue to fly, with or without the airline. The final flight will take off on April the 3rd, and Air New Zealand says passengers booked on services after that will be placed on flights from other airports. Ko Katie Doyle, Aho.
The Department of Corrections has apologised to 2 South Auckland schools which were not told about sex offenders living nearby for at least 2 years. 11 offenders, including 8 sex offenders, are living in 2 boarding houses less than a kilometre from at least 2 Waitangi schools. The department says it will try to rehouse 3 of them, but the 8 sex offenders will remain. The Northern Regional Commissioner, Jeanette Burns, says they can walk around the neighbourhood, but they're GPS monitored. She says if they go into exclusion zones, such as parks and schools, the department will respond swiftly. Victoria Square in Christchurch has reopened today. The slightly less famous cousin of nearby Cathedral Square has reopened after $7.5 million worth of earthquake repairs. As part of the restoration, the famous Boca fountain was repaired along with its coloured lights. The first electric fountain in Australasia was donated to the city by early settler Henry Boca in 1921. His great-great-niece Jane Stace has some strong childhood memories of it.
We used to drive in here, and of course that's when Victoria Street drove down the middle of the square, and of course we were always fascinated, and here was this fountain, you know, and it had our name, Boca, and of course at night, beautiful lights, yeah, and you know, as a child, magic, yeah, like magic.
Jane Stace says with much of the city now unrecognisable, it's great to hold on to some of what the old city used to look like. The heavy rain warning for Gisborne and Hawke's Bay put in place this morning has been lifted, and in Manawatu and Whanganui the Emergency Operations Centre has stood down after the rivers were judged at no risk of flooding. In Gisborne, Civil Defence says it will continue to monitor Cyclone Holla over the weekend. Met Service says the cyclone's course is difficult to track, but current forecasts show heavy rain and severe gales hitting Northland and the east coast of the North Island from early Monday through to Tuesday. It's 6:05. Sport, the Highlanders coach Aaron Major says slowing the Stormers forwards is the key to keeping their exciting backs under wraps in tonight's Super Rugby clash in Dunedin. The Highlanders are coming off a bye, while the Stormers were given a dust-up by the Crusaders in Christchurch last weekend. The South Africans did show plenty of attacking enterprise in the loss, however, and Major is aware of the threats they pose.
You've seen in patches of the games they have played so far, they can be very dangerous. They're a big physical, abrasive side, so they really rely on momentum, especially their forward pack, and Delunde does a lot of carrying for those guys as well. And then they've got some real threats in the broken field, so Sinatla and Roman Rule and those boys out in the wider channels are pretty dangerous, so look, we're well aware of the threats that are coming.
Aaron Major. Meanwhile, New Zealand Rugby General Manager Neil Sorensen is leaving after 17 years at head office. The Black Caps batsman Colin Munro will no longer play the longer form of cricket. Munro says he wants to specialise in white ball cricket, and his ambition is to make the next World Cup.
I missed out on the last World Cup, and you saw how the boys loved it and went that far. So it's something that I'm obviously very passionate about and want to hone my skills fully on developing. Obviously I've done okay at the top of the order, but haven't quite nailed it.
Munro and the Black Caps take on England in the one-day series decider in Christchurch tomorrow. The decision on whether the injured Ross Taylor plays will be made just before the start. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning we go to the 14th century with Professor James Bellich. He's been pondering the Black Death. To the 19th century on isolated Raoul Island, where a family attempts a doomed settlement. And the 20th century, and a documentary featuring people born at the beginning of it and still alive. As for the 21st, Harry Giles is as modern as they come, personally, politically and artistically. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Kapiti coast, including Coromandel Bay of plenty in the central high country. Increasing fine spells with isolated showers becoming confined to Northland this afternoon. Gisborne and the Wairoa district, rain with heavy falls south of Tokomaru Bay, easing to showers this evening. For the remainder of Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington, cloudy periods and a few showers clearing tomorrow afternoon. Inland Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, fine apart from isolated showers about Buller today and tomorrow morning. Coastal Marlborough and Canterbury, mostly cloudy with a few showers today, becoming fine tomorrow morning. Otago and Southland, cloudy periods and isolated showers, clearing this afternoon and becoming fine. And for the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a few showers. It's just gone 6:08 and you're listening to Trick, Chick, Chick.
Chick, 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 Chick. Thank you very much, Katrina Patton. Have a lovely weekend.
I will, you too.
Yeah, I will. Good weekend in Christchurch for that cricket game tomorrow by the sound of things from your weather forecast. That's good.
I hope so.
Go the Black Caps.
Fingers crossed.
Donald Trump, He does surprises, he tweets them, he says them. He was one, really, when he became president. But even by his own standards, today's announcement that he will meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un before May was, well, pretty extraordinary. CNN, like everyone, was utterly surprised by it.
And we're back with the breaking news tonight. President Trump agreeing to meet with Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, by May. An unprecedented move and a stunning development in a relationship that has included a volley of nasty insults, right? Leader of North Korea calling Trump a dotard, Trump calling him Little Rocket Man.
That's CNN's anchor on air at the time and almost incredulous or bewildered or all of the above. Kevin Liptuck is the White House producer and reporter for CNN. And once everyone had calmed down and taken stock of it, he told me this really was unexpected.
Yeah, it absolutely was. And Donald Trump clearly wanted to put his own face on it. You know, it's rare for the president to come to the briefing. This is actually the first time the president had been in the briefing room at all in the month or the year and a month that he's been president. So his presence in there was rare on its own. And then he's coming out to announce that the South Koreans are going to announce something. Clearly he wants, you know, to take his own part of this very historic announcement from the White House. The fact that they made this announcement in front of the West Wing, the fact that the president himself has agreed, we hear now, to meet with Kim Jong-un. It was really just kind of a striking moment. A lot of the details are still coming in, but clearly something that the president feels is a gamble worth taking.
Absolutely, and there is no downside really given the previous relationship between these two men, the dotard little rocket guy, you know, all of this sort of heightened alpha male rhetoric that has preceded this moment. So in a way, President Trump has nothing to lose from looking open to the meeting, does he?
Yeah, I don't know about that. I think that the president probably does have well, he doesn't have a lot to lose, I think, in appearing open maybe, but there's certainly something to lose in meeting with Kim Jong-un. I mean, no American president has ever met with a leader from North Korea. It's really not all that clear at this point what the North Koreans want out of this meeting. They say that they're committed to denuclearization. They say that they're committed to refraining from nuclear and missile tests. But, you know, the North Koreans have proved elusive to the Americans for talks for decades. There is some fear in Washington among establishment thinkers, you know, establishment foreign policy types, that the president just doesn't know what he's getting into here, and that he might not be prepared to represent, you know, American interests in a way that the North Koreans can't somehow exploit. There's really no precedent for these kind of talks, these kind of high-level talks. So I do think the president is taking a pretty striking gamble in accepting the invitation to meet with Kim Jong-un.
And normally in these circumstances, meetings between diplomats would precede the meeting between the leaders, and the diplomats would iron out talking points and questions and go and no-go areas. That's absolutely not going to happen here because they're both unilateralists and they will both do what they want to do come the meeting. But
and actually, you know, the president's top diplomat, Rex Tillerson, he's not in the country right now. He's in Ethiopia. He actually said today, hours before the president accepted this invitation, he said, we're a long way from negotiations. We have to be clear-eyed and realistic about it. He said that the state of direct talks was still, you know, a ways and ways in the distance. So clearly the president not exactly on the same page as his chief diplomat. That's not really anything new here.
No, it's not. No, I was just going to say that. Yeah, poor old Mr. Tillerson probably finds out most of what Donald Trump's up to by watching CNN, I suspect. Sarah Huckabee Sanders struck an interesting note. She said, we look forward to the denuclearization of North Korea, which is something the North Koreans have promised before. They've signed agreements saying they're going to denuclearize, and they haven't. But she says, in the meantime, all sanctions and maximum pressure must remain. And that is Washington's position, full stop, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's the reason the Trump administration believes North Korea is ready to talk and is coming to the negotiating table. The president views these sanctions as working. He has said that he's going to continue on that path without ruling out military action, of course, but, you know, primarily sanctions. He's been very harsh on China for not imposing what he says are strict enough sanctions and not upholding sort of their end of the bargain. Clearly, he believes that this is working. Clearly, he is going to be out there in the coming weeks and months saying that these sanctions led to the steps that we saw today. And I think there is some truth to that. Like these sanctions are some of the toughest that the U.S. has ever imposed. The question, I think, remains to be seen whether they achieve the ultimate goal. Like getting Kim Jong-un to the negotiating table isn't the ultimate goal for the United States. It's for North Korea to rid itself of nuclear capabilities. That remains to be seen whether that is ultimately what happens.
Kevin Liptak, who is a White House producer and correspondent for CNN, speaking to us a couple of hours ago. Primary school students in South Auckland have been walking past boarding houses with sex offenders every day for 2 years, but their school, local residents, parents, the kids themselves knew nothing about any of this. 11 offenders live at 2 different boarding houses on the same street in Ruapehu. Most of them have been there since 2015, although 3 were moved from Whangarei in the past week. As Sharon Brett Kelly reports, the principal of the closest schools and some locals are angry. The Department of Corrections simply hasn't told them.
Waitangi Primary School, with its 500-odd students, is less than a kilometre away from the boarding houses. But yesterday was the first time Principal Jason Swan had heard of sex offenders in the neighbourhood.
I would have hoped it was the common practice to let us know if offenders were in very close proximity to our school. But we haven't had any update, or we haven't been told about this latest news.
In the past, Jason Swan says Corrections has told principals around Auckland if offenders were coming into the area, but not this time. He says they are too close.
Yeah, there would be children walking to and from there, but also, the offenders, they would be walking as well.
Residents told RNZ they're angry they knew nothing about the offenders. Jessie Heather says it's too risky for so many of them to be near schools.
It scares any parent, having to have school kids around and with them around. So all I can say is protect everyone in school and take them away from that sort of atmosphere so that then the police and everybody else involved can clear those people out completely.
Others say local schools and residents have the right to know.
I am so shocked of what I'm here today.
Do you have children?
Yes, I have children, age 12 and teenager, and I will keep an eye on them. The school should have been aware that there are other people like that around the area. Yeah, I think the public should have the rights to know about what's going on.
Corrections this afternoon apologised to Jason Swan and the principal of another nearby school, Mount Richmond. The Northern Regional Commissioner, Jeanette Burns, says 3 of the offenders will be moved, but the other 8, all sex offenders, will remain at the 2 boarding houses.
We're putting in some additional oversight through the week from one of our service providers who works very closely with these types of offenders and works very well with them. Some additional probation officer support Monday to Friday, and we'll also do some increased home visits over the weekend.
She says they can walk around the neighbourhood but are monitored.
They're on GPS and there are exclusion zones which we are notified immediately through the GPS monitoring if they go anywhere into those exclusion zones which are like the schools and parks. And then we notify police immediately who follow up very, very swiftly.
Jeanette Burns says finding accommodation for offenders is Corrections' most difficult job. She says they are less risk to society when they are housed rather than homeless, and she's confident that the department will follow up on any breaches very swiftly. Mō te hotaka o te ahi ko Sharon Brett Kelly aho.
Let's head north from Auckland. More than 100 people were welcomed onto Te Ati Marae in Waitangi this afternoon for the start of the first national commemoration of the New Zealand Wars. This follows a 2015 petition by Otorahanga College students signed by 13,000 people that called for the government to set aside a national day marking the 19th century wars. Te Mana Korehi reporter Shannon Haunui-Thompson is in Waitangi. Kia ora, Shannon. First of all, what's the weather like? And secondly, who's there?
Well, actually, the weather's not that great. Luckily, it's just stopped raining, and at the moment, who is here? So the pōwhiri for all the dignitaries from around the country, or iwi leaders from around the country, is still happening behind me. So we have representatives from Tauranga Moana, Mātātua Waka, and Taranaki. And there's actually a lot of school kids, or there's actually Te Kura Kaupapa Māori, Te Kura Kaupapa Māori or Waiaweka is here as well. So they've all come to be part of these commemorations.
And Shannon, what's happening over the weekend? What sort of thing will be taking place?
Well, actually, there's quite a few activities, and most of them are going to be based here at Te Tii Marae. So after the pōwhiri finishes today, soon, there will be panel discussions with a lot of descendants of those northern rangatira that were part of the battles. So descendants, for example, descendants of Kawiti and Honiheke. Wow. So that panel discussion will go through the evening. And then in the morning, they're actually having little bus tours of the actual conflict sites here up at Ruapehu Pa and Ohaiawai. So people can catch buses here from Te Tii Marae and be taken up to those conflict sites, or riri whenua, and learn a bit about what happened at those during those battles there at those sites. And then on Sunday is actually the main commemoration day, and a big commemoration service and ceremony will be held over in Kororareka, Russell, and at Christchurch. So a beautiful procession will be a morning procession through the streets of Russell, and then they'll end up at Christchurch, where they'll do a service and pay tribute to those who died in the battle on March the 11th all those years ago.
Shannon Hanui-Thompson, I'm envious, Shannon. It'll be a wonderful place to be. I wish I was up there. Thank you so much for joining us from Te Tii, which is just down the hill. If you don't know Waitangi, the Te Tii Marae is just down the hill from the famous treaty grounds. You go over the narrow bridge and up the hill and you're at Waitangi itself. Without directly pointing the finger at Russia, the British government says it will respond appropriately if evidence shows Moscow was behind a nerve agent attack on a former Russian spy and his daughter. Sergei and Yulia Skripal remain critically ill in hospital after they were found unconscious outside a shopping centre in Salisbury on Monday. Suggestions of any involvement by Russia have sparked anger there. State media has complained of an anti-Russian campaign by the West, and among the Russian public there's little sympathy for the former double agent. Here's the BBC's Moscow correspondent Steve Rosenberg.
Moscow feels a world away from the drama of Salisbury. Relaxed Russians are out enjoying a public holiday, determined not to allow a spy scandal to spoil their day. People here are short on sympathy for Sergei Skripal.
The fewer secrets you sell, the longer you'll live.
Don't betray your motherland, then you'll have no problems.
When he was in prison in Russia, he was healthy. He goes to Britain and gets poisoned. He should have stayed here.
It's a similar message from Russian TV. The Kremlin-controlled media have been mocking Boris Johnson and making fun of Britain. If you're a professional traitor, he says, my advice, don't move to England. Something's not right there. The climate, perhaps. But too many bad things go on there. People are hanged, poisoned, helicopter crashes, or they fall out of windows. Under Vladimir Putin, the Kremlin has sent a very clear message to the Russian people that their country is a besieged fortress, threatened by enemies abroad and traitors at home. That's why there's little sympathy here for Sergei Skripal. And if Moscow did target Sergei Skripal,
most Russian people, not me of course, but most Russian people will take pride in it. Because there's a very black and white worldview. It's us against them. Putin has brought this back in a big way.
Today, the president delivered a special address. No mention of spies. He congratulated Russian women on International Women's Day. Moscow knows it's under suspicion, but the Kremlin is acting as if it's business as usual.
Steve Rosenberg there from Moscow. He's the BBC's man in Moscow. Residents in 13 homes in Tauranga have been told to evacuate their houses immediately because some of them could collapse. The homes are part of a development by failed company Bella Vista Homes. The Tauranga City Council's Chief Executive Gary Paul says it's acted immediately after an inspection this morning. He told our reporter Rowan Quinn that he's worried if Cyclone Ola potentially hits on Monday, bringing bad weather, some of the houses may not stay standing.
First of all, a structural impact which will potentially have an effect on 3 properties, and then a geotechnical impact which will have an effect potentially on the 21 sites.
I saw in your release you mentioned a slope that wasn't retained. Is the worry that the slope could collapse if there was heavy rain or something?
Yes, that is correct. I mean, the slope is not retained, and the geotechnical engineers say that given the cyclone conditions, there is a risk that the slope is not stable and it may collapse.
And does that mean, would it potentially come into homes, or is that it would be someone could be wandering past?
Yes, I mean, potentially, earth and soil could go into homes, but more critically, there are homes on top of this cut. So homes themselves could actually be tipped off, if you like, because they're built on the top of this cut. So if the cut was to collapse, the homes would collapse.
And the structural ones, so
yes.
Is the fear that the homes wouldn't stand in very strong wind?
That's correct. Well, what we're doing is we're taking steps to rectify that issue prior to the cyclone arriving, and we've got people working on site as we speak to do that with the objective of having that remedied before Monday.
The residents are being offered temporary accommodation by the council. It's coming up to 25 minutes past 6. Shannon Honui-Thompson from Te Manakora, he's up at Te Te for the commemoration of the New Zealand Wars this weekend at Waitangi, is a hard-out Warriors Rugby League fan, a dedicated Warriors Rugby League fan. Bless her heart, because Shannon and I have worked together off and on for years now. She starts every season full of hope and optimism and ends every season sitting in the corner in the fetal position, crushed. Ever faithful Warriors Rugby League fans are hoping for a change in fortune, and Shannon and all Warriors fans listening, we wish you so well. The National Rugby League season kicks off for the side in Perth when they play South Sydney there on Saturday night. It's 7 long years, a long, painful year since the club last made the top 8 end-of-season playoffs. It's the top 8. And to make matters even worse, they finished 2017 with 9 straight losses. Sports reporter Ravinda Hunuia looks at whether the signs are any different for 2018.
March 10th, 1995, a New Zealand Rugby League legacy was born. The Warriors make history running through a lit Mount Smart Stadium tunnel for the very first time.
The crowd welcomes the Auckland Warriors. And listen to this crowd now.
Among those who ran out on that historic day was a 23-year-old Stephen Kearney. Now 23 years on, the team he now coaches will begin their season on the exact same date in Perth with an objective to get the club back to winning ways.
Certainly the hard work that the boys have put in, during the pre-season, and it's about all putting it together now for round 1, and we're coming up against a challenging side, and so it's just about the expectation is about piecing the improvements that we wanted to work on, putting it to work on Saturday afternoon.
Kearney has been busy in the off-season signing New Zealand internationals Adam Blair and Tohu Harris. He's named a 21-man squad which includes 7 debutants in the hope of rectifying last year's disappointing results. But former Kiwis coach Graham Lowe says it will take more than a few fresh faces to turn things around in 2018. The Warriors lost their last 9 games of the season last year, and Lowe says a lack of club culture is stopping the club from gaining credibility.
Culture is about the expectations, it's about how everyone treats results, it's about accountability. It's not about how you do your hair or anything like that. Culture is about what it takes to actually be a good footy club, and have been lacking at the Warriors.
The Warriors are yet to win in Western Australia after 9 attempts, and an unsuccessful result this weekend will be added pressure on Kearney's coaching role.
When you coach, it's always your last chance. It's one of those unfortunate jobs that you're measured by your last result. Blind Freddie can tell that the Warriors' performances in recent years have been woeful. It would have been preying on Stephen's mind, and and it's up to him to make the appropriate changes.
Warriors stalwart Sir Peter Leach, aka the Mad Butcher, has kept the faith during the lean years and is ever the optimist.
But they just got to do the work on the field. Simple as that. We've got a new CEO, we've got some new players, we've got a new fitness trainer. Yeah, I can see a light at the end of the tunnel.
The Warriors' first home game of the season is against the Gold Coast Titans next weekend. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pō nei, ko Ravinda Hunia ahau.
Thank you, Ravinda. Some lovely feedback coming in tonight. A really nice feedback from someone travelling to Matarangi. Thank you. We really appreciate it. This person who signs himself Arthur C. Clarke, it may be his real name, and then again, it may not, says CNN is one of the participants in the war. I have a fantasy where Ted Turner is elected president but refuses because he doesn't want to give up power. Air New Zealand pulling out of a local airport again. Lots of you are exercised by this, particularly people on the Kapiti coast who say they haven't actually been ideal citizens. The flights have been more expensive than flights out of Wellington to Auckland and surprisingly often cancelled. This person says they were set up to provide a service for New Zealand. Now they don't care. Frank, wonderful Frank, who we hear from very often, picks the baton up from that listener and says, John, didn't Kapiti vote for National, which in turn privatised Air New Zealand? That partial privatisation demands maximum returns for all shareholders, especially private investors. What did Kapiti voters expect would happen by voting for National? People don't seem to like free market-driven politics when it turns and bites them. Lots of people reflecting on the departure of Air New Zealand from Kapiti. Thank you. It's really lovely to hear from you all. I just want to say before we go, Checkpoint is a fantastic team effort. Our executive producer is Pip Keane. Our producers are Catherine Woolbridge and Bridget Burke. Our digital editor is Michelle Cook. Our reporter is Zach Fleming. In the control room, running the technical operation to get us out is Jeremy Ansell, and our director, Calvin Samuel. On behalf of all of us, have a wonderful weekend.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. People in 13 homes in an unfinished development in Tauranga have been told to evacuate immediately because their houses are in danger of collapsing. A badly injured tramper in Mount Aspiring National Park was lucky to have been spotted by a helicopter crew searching for someone else. And the US President has accepted an unprecedented invitation from North Korea's leader for the two to meet. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Looking for the ideal present? Country Life has the answer.
Two couples came to see the sheep at the show, and both the woman partners said that they would move in and marry the bloke they were with if they bought these sheep. I've got a friend that said a lot of husbands will hate us because the pressure they're going to be under.
Yes, you've got to sell them to the wives.
What is this breed that's new to New Zealand? Check out Country Life, Friday night at 9, Saturday morning at 7 on RNZ National.